Hi, everybody. This recording is for SIG and chapter leaders. Just a couple of updates for the month of December that I wanted to get to you before the holidays to give you some things to think about. The first, I think most of you already know this. Anyone that wasn't able to attend the chapter and SIG leader orientation, you will find that recording in the library of your community. So this is the SIG officers community. And you'll see that that is saved there. If I went to the chapter officers community, it would be there. If you got this video, then you are a member of that community. And I suggest that you go watch this video if you have not already watched it, the video for the orientation, because that covered a lot of content that is relevant to your role. And I wanted to make sure you had that. During the orientation, I mentioned that I would bring more clarity to the topic of meetings and events. And so I spent some time today creating a web page that is going to be linked from both the chapter and the SIG leader resources web pages. If you're not sure about that, if you go to membership chapters, you'll see chapter leadership resources. And if you get a special interest group, you'll see SIG leadership resources. So that's where this page is going to live, linked to both of those sites. But it's SIG and chapter meeting and event options. And it goes through the various options, which I will do with you right now. There are some overarching rules to all SIG and chapter events. So I put those front and center just so you are all aware. So those are, first, that with the exception of a networking event, really a meet and greet kind of event, you may not offer an event free to non-members. You can offer events free to members, but not to non-members. And networking events, if you're doing that, they can't contain any sort of educational content. So if you're doing a meet and greet, let us tell you about our chapter or our SIG and encourage you to join ASIS and join our chapter or SIG. That's fine to do for free. But if you're doing anything that contains any sort of educational content, you can do it free for members, but you cannot do it free for non-members. You don't have to charge a lot, but you have to charge something to distinguish between members and non-members. All of the ASIS platforms, which are really essentially GoToWebinar for non-interactive webinars and Zoom for more interactive activities, should be used for your events. So we encourage you to use our Zoom as opposed to the Zoom of one of your SIG or chapter members. And we can make that available to you either to use independent of ASIS staffing or preferably with an ASIS staff member on there to help support your event. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Registration is required for all ASIS events, including networking events, including if they're free for non-members. We can set up events with registration that are free, but they all need to run through headquarters and be set up with registration. The reason for that is that way we capture the contact information of everybody that's there. Some events, if they're sort of low stakes, low registration, like a networking event, we will put the Zoom link right in the confirmation. So once you've signed up for something, the attendee will get the Zoom link. If it's a little more proprietary, if we don't want that Zoom link spread around early on, then we will wait and send out a Zoom link towards the end, or with GoToWebinar, there's a whole separate link for the event. But we do require that people register for everything. This has been a really big problem recently specifically with like SIG symposia, where a lot of presenters didn't know they had to be registered for the event in order to be presenters. And they were being sent the Zoom link for an event directly rather than through ASIS. That is not permitted. So everybody has to be registered. If they fall into a category for somebody that has to pay registration, then they have to pay the registration themselves. You can comp registration for people for a SIG or chapter event if you're willing to pay for it out of your own money. But they do all have to be paid for if they require payment. So again, do not send Zoom information to anybody for an event that you're hosting directly. Those will be sent out from headquarters. We will take care of that. That's why we ask people to register. Finally, we need to know what kind of an event you're doing. If you're not sure what kind of event you want to do, get in touch with us. Reach out to membership@asis.org or meetings@asis.org. Really, either of those can help you, and we will help you figure out which one of these event types is right for what you have in mind. But once you've figured out what you want to do, you're going to fill out this event notification form. And this will be your way of letting ASIS headquarters know that you're doing an event. I'm actually going to add one more fundamental to this list here, which is we need at least 4 weeks notice before an event that is going to be marketed widely. So webinar or a symposia, really a symposia or a regional conference or something like that, we should have 8 to 12 weeks notice. But we definitely need some advance notice on these things. And the way you let us know is you fill out this event notification form. If you want to do a webinar, the process is a little bit different. Submitting a webinar, let's go over here. If you want to submit a webinar, that just goes through a slightly different process. You're going to go to meetings, webinars, and click here to propose / host a webinar. I'll link that to this page too when I update it. Okay, so different types of events that you could offer. I mentioned the networking and recruitment event. So this is an event, it's held over Zoom, that is hosted by a chapter or SIG. You can reach out to non-members and say, hey, we want you to learn more about ASIS and more about our chapter and our SIG. Please join us for this event. Again, what you would send them is a registration link. They would come and register on our website, and then we would send them out the Zoom information for how to access that event. So that way everything runs through us. We have the contact information of everybody that joins. In terms of financial issues, you can offer it at a $0 price. If you wanted to charge registration, you could, but typically these sorts of things are free. And from a staffing perspective, ASIS staff don't usually staff these events. They're usually done by the chapter or the SIG, usually ideally with the ASIS Zoom account, and you can get access to that by contacting membership@asis.org. But if you want to do something like this in a member Zoom account, we can do that. We would just need to know that Zoom information. But there's no reason to do it in a member Zoom account when we can do it through the ASIS account. So that is a networking and recruitment event. The next thing is a webinar. I showed you the link here for how to propose a webinar. The webinars are done, there are 2 different types of webinars. There's a regular webinar and an interactive webinar. So a regular webinar is 1 hour long, roughly 40 to 45 minutes of presentation by 1 or more presenters with PowerPoint slides or whatever kinds of slides you want to use. And then question and answer time, which is it's non-interactive. Essentially, somebody would type a question into the platform and the moderator would then ask the presenter the question. They would answer the question and we'd move on. So people can't unmute themselves. They can't ask questions directly. They're not visible. The only people you see in there are the presenters. So that's a standard webinar. We do one of those a week just about fairly regularly. And the content then gets uploaded to our webinar archive and linked to the website and so forth. So they're very well marketed, very well, good visibility. The one other thing I'm going to go back and add to these fundamentals is all ASIS events, with the exception possibly of a networking event, is recorded. Anything that is imparting ASIS or intellectual content, we want to record that so that it can be repurposed, reused, archived, etc. So the webinars are recorded and they're uploaded to iConnect. Financially, all webinars are free to members, and they're $25 for non-members. That is written in stone, and that's the way we price all of our webinars. If a SIG or a chapter wanted to offer a webinar with a coupon code for non-members, we could do that. Then the coupon would be charged back to the chapter or SIG. So that's one way to get rid of some money if a chapter or a SIG has excess money it's trying to spend. But we really feel it's very important that there be a distinction between the value of membership and the value and what you get as a non-member. And so we do require that you charge for that whenever possible. There's no cost to a SIG or a chapter to host a regular webinar. And in the somewhat unlikely event that we get more than 5 paid registrations for a webinar, then the SIG or the chapter gets the revenue left over after we get paid for the first 5. So again, very rarely do we see more than 5 paid registrants. However, a SIG or a chapter could go out and market the webinar more widely than we typically market it. We typically market it to our database of about 10,000 people, but if you go out and market it more widely, you might be able to find some more paying people. In terms of staffing, ASIS staff will organize the webinar, we market it, we host it, We can moderate it if you don't have somebody else that can moderate it. So we do once you tell us what you want to do, we really take over and contact the speakers and take everything from there. So it's a fairly not too labor intensive thing for the SIG&Chapter to do once you identify a speaker and the content that you want to present. So that's a regular webinar. We can then offer an interactive webinar. So some groups want to do a webinar where people can unmute and ask questions directly, or we can put people into breakout groups, have a little more interaction among the presenters and the attendees. But it's still a short session, like an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So not anything super long, but we do it over Zoom, which allows for more interactivity. We don't use Zoom webinar, we just use regular Zoom. But otherwise, it's really the same thing as a regular webinar. Again, same pricing, $0 for members, $25 for non-members, same revenue structure, and same staffing. We will provide staff to run the event and do the moderation if you need help with moderation. And in the cases of any of these webinars, if you wanted to, ASIS staff are working typically sort of 8 a.m. U.S. Eastern time to 6 p.m. U.S. Eastern time. That sort of falls within our regular reasonable work hours. If you wanted to do something outside of that time frame, we would do it in Zoom, and we would give you our Zoom information and allow you to host that yourself on Zoom. So you would need to have staff, you need to have volunteers on your end that were able to run a Zoom meeting, and we'd provide the host code and all of that, so you could do that yourself. So that's certainly an option to do things outside of normal North American business hours, and we really encourage you to do that. We want to create more opportunities and accessibility for members outside of North America. Okay, so those are the webinar options. Now we're going to talk about a virtual symposium. You can do a face-to-face symposium as well. That's a component of the annual meeting, and so the pricing and the rules are a little bit different. So I'm really just talking about virtual events right now. We communicate with the SIGs and chapters about opportunities at annual meeting when the time frame for that comes along. So that's a little different. So right now we're really just talking about virtual. But a virtual symposium is essentially a 4 to 8 hour event that is sort of a mini annual meeting. So it's an annual meeting around either the topic of the SIG or issues relevant to the region of the chapter. Ideally you have presentations of papers and maybe posters, possibly even some sort of a keynote opportunity, but it's not long. It's 4 to 8 hours. Delivered over Zoom. If you're doing 4 hours, probably do it in one day. But if you wanted to do 8 hours, you can either do 4 hours in the morning, take a break, 4 hours in the afternoon, or you could do it over the course of a couple of days. You could do it over a weekend. ASIS staff prefer not to have to work on the weekend. So, that's not ideal. But if you think you'd get better attendance on the weekend, we can talk about that. In terms of cost, it's up to you how you want to price it. Again, can not be free for non-members. But in the case of this, ASIS is going to charge your chapter or SIG a $25 administrative fee per attendee at a virtual symposium. So we suggest that you charge at least $25 per attendee for your registration fee. So what we frequently see happening is the chapters and SIGs will charge $25 for a member student, something like $50 for a member professional, and then maybe $50 for a non-member student, $75 for a member professional, something along those lines. Because you want, in addition to doing this to impart knowledge, this is also an opportunity for your SIG&Chapter to earn some revenue that you could then use later for another kind of event, for speaker honoraria, for multiple other things that you're interested in doing, awards, that kind of thing. So we really encourage you to charge what you think the value of the content is, because this stuff that you guys do is very valuable. And, so we want to price it accordingly and make some money for the chapter or the SIG along the way. So we charge you $25. You keep all the rest of the revenue after the $25 per attendee is paid for. And then from the staffing perspective, ASIS staff will be on the entire time. We will set up your registration. We'll do your marketing. We will you know, host breakout rooms and various, whatever other things you want to do. The only thing you all might need to provide are volunteers that are able to hit record in a breakout room if there are multiple breakout rooms and we need to record breakout rooms. But that's a virtual symposium. So it's, you know, sort of reasonably contained in length, but, you know, very similar to an annual meeting in terms of format and content. But really sort of topic specific around whatever the symposium topic is. A virtual workshop. This is something that SIGs and chapters haven't really done before. We've always called the events before an annual meeting a workshop, even when they're really a symposium. And so we're going to change that wording for this coming year and distinguish between workshops and symposia. So before annual meeting, we'll have SIG, possibly chapter symposia, as well as workshops that may or may not be SIG or chapter sponsored. So a workshop is very specifically a structured meeting or educational program where people collaborate to learn skills, solve problems, work on projects, etc. So the learning skills is really an important component of this. This is real education. They should have a clearly defined set of learning outcomes and provide time for attendees to have hands-on experience and significant interaction with the facilitators and instructors. So that's a workshop. Different from a symposium. It's not just sort of one-way exchange of knowledge. It's a real learning, hands-on learning experience for attendees. This is priced the same way that a virtual symposium is. So we will charge $25 for every attendee, and then the rest of the revenue goes to the chapter or SIG. In the case of these kinds of events, and even in the case of a symposium, you may have some speaker honoraria expenses. Keep in mind, you cannot use SIG or chapter money to pay an ASIS member to speak at an event. But if you bring in folks that are not members of ASIS, then we can pay them honoraria out of the revenue for the event. If the event doesn't make enough revenue and you still have a commitment to the speaker, you need to make sure you have enough money in your budget to pay that honorarium, whether or not you make enough money on the event. And then staffing, same as for a virtual symposium. We will be there along the way to help make sure everything gets recorded and is supported fully throughout. All right, so that's the workshop. And finally, a SIG conference or chapter regional meeting. So these are a big deal. These are 2 days or more, either virtual or face-to-face, or in some cases, both. They cover a range of topics, whereas a symposia is a little more concentrated and focused on a single research question or topic or SIG area or region. Well, I guess a regional meeting would be the same, but these conferences and regional meetings are just longer and bigger. They're sort of a localized annual meeting, if you will. So they'll have, you know, a keynote speaker or two or more, breakout sessions for papers, panels, posters, etc. All the same sorts of components of an ASIS annual meeting, but focused on either a SIG or a chapter. That's not to say that you don't open up registration to everybody, particularly if you're doing it as a virtual event, but they are, you know, sort of something smaller than an annual meeting from a, you know, sort of attendance perspective, typically. Very important in the case of most of this education, not all of it, but most of these events, we ask that you not do 6 weeks before or 6 weeks after an annual meeting. We don't want to cannibalize the annual meeting with other events, particularly with regional conferences. Those should be held as far away from annual meeting as possible. So spring is a great time to hold a regional conference. Plus, we have, you know, more capacity as ASIS staff to help with the event. So as I said, it can be in person or virtual. You can live stream some of the content if you want. The Asia chapter very successfully has offered a couple of hybrid events, regional conferences over the year, so they're a great resource on this. Financial considerations, this is really negotiated at the time that the event is conceived. We will figure out a budget, we will set registration costs, and we will discuss what share of the registration revenue after expenses are paid goes to headquarters versus to the region or SIG. It has a lot to do with sort of what kind of staff resources are required, how much effort is being put in by the chapter or SIG, how much in-kind support we can get from a hosting institution, if there is such a thing, et cetera. So those are done on a case-by-case basis. Staffing, again, we will figure out when we get to that point. So it may be that you need a lot of staff support. It may be that you need very little. New England chapter, or U.S. Northeast chapter, for example, hosts a regional conference every year. They need almost no ASIS staff support. Other groups have needed considerably more. So it varies case by case. And so we really attack it on a case by case basis. If you're having a face-to-face event, ASIS will try to send somebody to it from the headquarters, usually me. I will try to attend to sort of represent ASIS broadly and communicate, anything I can from a headquarters perspective. So that is really the array of different events that a SIG or chapter could have. If there is something I haven't talked about here that you want to do, that's fine. Let us know. We are wide open to creating things as we go. So if you come up with a new idea, let's pilot test it and see how it goes. All right. If you have any questions, please email either me or meetings@asis.org or membership@asis.org. We will all be standing by to help you. All right. Thanks. Bye.